Let's talk about this No Mercy video game. Is SA and dumb fantasy harmful? Content warning. This video contains discussion of SA and issues of consent in an educational context. If these topics trigger you, viewer discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Nadia, and if you're new here then welcome. I'm a bit of a variety streamer with a focus on horror, but I'm also a beginner game developer, so I have a real big interest in how games can shape our society. And there's a new game that's come out called No Mercy that I felt a bit of a need to talk about. I haven't played the game as I don't want to contribute to its sales, but I have seen gameplay of it and have done my research. So what is No Mercy about? No Mercy is an adult game that has been developed by Xerac Games, and it is quite frankly very troubling. It glorifies coercion, manipulation, and not only has severe SA as its core theme, but this is all in a storyline involving a son and a mother-like figure. No, you're not hearing me incorrectly. It also rewards players for performing immoral acts like taking explicit photos of the mother, making her feel guilty about them, and blackmailing her with them. The official description of the game can be seen here, where it's essentially about after your mother's affair shatters your family, you take on a new role, not to fix what's broken, but to claim her for yourself, unveil her deepest secrets, subdue her, and make all women yours. How disgusting does that sound? Since the game came out recently, March 2025, all forms of media has been scrutinizing it for being a simulator. I actually don't think it's that at all. I think it's a lot worse than that. The game actually begins with gradually encouraging users to perform manipulative and degrading acts before SA even takes place. For example, early dialogue of the game consists of the main character, the son, taking explicit photos of the mother and quoting, "They give me an insane power over my mum. This is an opportunity to get what I want. With these pictures I can make her do anything I please." This isn't harmless dialogue. It perpetuates degrading themes of coercion and control that are disturbingly common in today's society. It reflects real-world issues such as image-based abuse, blackmail, and the exploitation of power imbalances that disproportionately affect women and girls. Behaviors that are not confined to fiction but have tangible, damaging consequences for victims in everyday life. The game even includes a dominance scale, which reinforces the narrative that power is justified through manipulation and supremacy. In a world of Andrew Tate and TV shows like Adolescence, this isn't harmless escapism. It's a gamified rehearsal of control and domination that reflects, reinforces, and encourages the attitudes that we are already struggling to dismantle in the real world. The game normalizes a worldview where women are constantly being sexualized, reduced to objects of male control. The main character makes degrading or sexual comments about almost every woman that's in a scene. Even at university, they say things like, "All the teachers here are old and ugly anyways." All these remarks do is strengthen the dehumanization of women based on their sexual attractiveness. These depictions aren't just offensive, they're dangerous. Fantasies of SA and male domination don't exist in a vacuum. They stem from and feed into a wider cultural script that harms women on a systemic level. The game also awards players for performing immoral actions, such as wanting to make the mum feel guilty about the pictures of herself. It even gives more points for choosing the worst option and gives hints as to what would be the better option to lead to faster dominance. Lastly, throughout the rest of the game, there are many themes of SA that occur. Bear in mind that these portrayals are for the pleasure of the user. So, how has it been taken? The game has actually been removed from Steam, but I'm going to talk more about this later. There have been countless articles from all sorts of news outlets reporting the same information about the negativity behind this game. There have been many videos circling online criticizing the game and even subreddits discussing it. There have also been petitions with thousands of signups to try and get the game removed, and all this public involvement was for such good reason, because without it, who knows whether that game would still be available today. Overall, the world has taken a very unanimous standpoint in that this game is pretty horrid, but it's a little bit more complex than that. What did the developers say? Xerac Games have strongly defended it, claiming that they haven't done anything wrong. So let's take a little bit more into their response. The developers of No Mercy have defended this game, framing it as just a fantasy, comparing it to consensual adult roleplay. In particular, they said, "Here also, no one wants anyone to get hurt. However, it's strongly connected with blackmail and male domination, which is also a fetish. If someone plays with their partner at home, pretending to be a student and teacher who demands sexual acts in exchange for a grade, should we label them as sick and call them check their computer and lock them in prison? I fully understand that for many people such things may be disgusting, but people should really do what they want as long as they don't harm anyone." While I acknowledge the comparison to consensual kink scenarios, their defense overlooks a fundamental and dangerous distinction: consent. In real-world roleplay, all participants can give and withdraw consent at any point. Fictional characters, however, cannot. Or they could be able to if it was built into them, in which this case it was not. By removing consent from the equation, this game portrays coercion, such as blackmailing using intimate images, not as abuse, but as a legitimate pathway to user gratification. This is not a fantasy. Even if it was a fantasy, that is not okay. There are laws in place which criminalize non-consensual acts in porn, so video games shouldn't be any different. Beyond it being a fantasy, this is still harmful through normalizing not seeking consent. It also is a reinforcement of real-world systems of power, dominance, and exploitation. Moreover, the claim that no one is harmed and using this to justify depictions of SA is a problem in itself. Depictions of SA, even in fictional or digital forms, normalize and trivialize these acts, especially when they're presented without consequences or criticism. Harm does not require the presence of a physical injury. Survivors of SA often suffer psychological symptoms marked by anxiety, depression, nightmares, dissociation, and can even suffer from long-term physical symptoms like chronic pain or dysfunction. Suggesting that the harm is absent simply because the violence is digital ignores the very real psychological and cultural impact that this content can have, not just on individuals, but also on society's understanding of consent, power, and abuse. Furthermore, the developers go on to say, can a game harm someone? According to many studies, with the emergence of the internet and porn in the 90s, SA crimes decreased by half. If someone is sick, dangerous, and might actually harm someone, would playing a game or watching porn increase their desire to do so? We sincerely doubt it. Rather, they'll just satisfy this need at home and perhaps save someone from harm. This quote is overspilling with lies and overreaching claims that are extremely dangerous considering the severity of this topic. The very insinuation that playing a game like this could potentially save someone from harm is not only absolutely outrageous in this corporate setting, but I'm pretty sure it's illegal. They go on to say, it's somewhat similar to shootings and playing games. It has been proven many times that games reduced the amount of violence in people rather than increasing it. This is just ludicrous. To my knowledge, it has not been proven many times that games have reduced violence rather than increasing it. In fact, in a world where we are seeing a rise in video games alongside a rise in crime simultaneously suggests otherwise. I'm not saying that there's a definite causation there, but what I am saying is that what Xeric Games is inferring is extremely unlikely, and it is incredibly dangerous to be spreading misinformation like that. The most frustrating thing about this statement is that Xeric Games are almost trying to cover themselves and say, oh, yeah, we thought about this. We've tried to make the world better by having this game out there. That is not the case at all. There is no good that comes from having this game out. They are trying to cater to a fetish for profit, not trying to make the world a better place. So you're not being righteous, so just own it. What does the research say? Xeric Games are correct in saying that there are some studies that show a reduction of real-world aggression, but this is not consistent. The research is limited and there has been no causation proved. Any impact on real-world behavior, even if significant, is relatively small when it can be found. The point is, it's so varied in conclusion that you can't really say either way. So again, Xeric Games trying to hide behind this is just ridiculous. Research into media influence has long shown that repeated exposure to harmful representations, especially in immersive mediums like games, sometimes can desensitize individuals, alter perceptions of reality, and normalize harmful behaviors. The American Psychological Association has published extensive research on the effects of violence and sexualized media on behavior and cognition. Their findings suggest that exposure to violent content can increase aggressive behavior, aggressive cognition, and decrease empathy and sensitivity to aggression. This research was conducted primarily with young adults, with adolescents making up the second largest age group studied. This means that whilst Xeric Games claim that healthy people shouldn't be affected by this, it is our most impressionable subset of society that is being introduced to these malicious concepts. A study by Dill, Brown, and Collins in 2008 found that long-term exposure to video game violence significantly increased the tolerance of sexual harassment and acceptance of SA myths, false beliefs that trivialize or justify sexual violence. The more players exposed to scenarios where coercion is presented as a kink or just a game, the more likely they are to see such behaviors as acceptable in the real world. The argument that games reduce crime by providing an outlet is tenuous at best. While some data shows a correlation between video game popularity and a general decrease in youth violence, Correlation is different from causation, in which causation was not found here. Besides, this certainly does not extend to all types of content. Crucially, there are documented cases where individuals have acted on ideas that they had found in games. One example of this is Evan Ramsey, a 16-year-old boy who on February 19th, 1997 opened fire on his classmates, claiming that he didn't realize they would die and that he honestly believed that if you shoot somebody, that they would get back up. Whilst time has moved on quite a bit since then, it is still important to note that school shootings still have a horrible presence that tend to dominate news headlines today. Aside from this, there are countless of crimes that have been committed alluding to the very same themes that are presented in this game. One being a man in the US convicted for blackmailing underage girls into sending nude images by threatening to leak other photos. These cases highlight that whilst games may not create violent tendencies in everyone, they can influence behaviors in vulnerable individuals, especially when the line is blurred between fantasy and realism. There are too many cases surrounding this topic to include here, but the fact that Xerath Games is spewing nonsense and false, at the very least one-sided information surrounding the dangers behind violent content and its impact on individuals shows that these developers cannot be trusted. Not only are these lies, it is disrespectful to all of the victims who have suffered attacks as a result of normalizing these themes of SA. Lastly, they begin to apologize by saying, if after reading the above you still believe that such a game should not have been created, then we sincerely apologize to you. This, by the way, is not a real apology. At the same time, we would like you to be a bit more open to human fetishes that don't harm anyone, even though they may seem disgusting to you. This claim is ridiculous. I don't even know where to begin. Xerath Games, in an attempt to save face, are gaslighting society, trying to make us all feel bad for fetish shaming. SA is not a fetish, it is a crime, and it does harm people. I didn't think I'd have to say that. I just want to reiterate that kinks and fetish shaming is not okay, but criminal acts are not fetishes or kinks that we need to accommodate for or be non-judgmental about. Can you imagine if anyone else said, oh, you might think murder is disgusting, but there are people out there that really like it, and so we shouldn't shame them for that? No. They go on to say, this is still just a game, and although many people are trying to make it into something more, it remains and will continue to be a game. This is an interesting point, which I'll talk about more on soon, but this doesn't mean that Xerath Games' claims overall haven't been incredibly damaging. Overall, their response attempts to deflect criticism by framing it as one of personal taste or discomfort, rather than engaging with the broader ethical concerns. By asking critics to be more open to fetishes, the developers combine consensual kink with non-consensual violence, dismissing legitimate objections as mere prudishness. In real-life kink and roleplay, consent is central. It is discussed, agreed upon, and can be withdrawn at any moment. But this game strips away consent entirely. There's no negotiation, there's no boundaries, it's just manipulation masked as a fantasy. Furthermore, the insistence that this is just a game ignores a growing body of research showing that media, especially interactive media like video games, can influence attitudes, desensitize players to violence, and reinforce harmful power dynamics. Framing the conversation around subjective offense rather than structural harm allows them to avoid accountability, all whilst continuing to perpetuate narratives rooted in coercion, objectification, and control. A fetish only remains harmless when it involves mutual consent and respect. When it reflects or reinforces real-world power imbalances, like normalizing degradation, it can contribute to harmful attitudes, even if it's fictional. Just because something happens in a game doesn't mean it's free from real-world impact. Let's talk about this point though. It's just a game. With all media, games, movies, TV, books, how bad is it to have a storyline that involves crime? Not even just SA, but crime in general. Grand Theft Auto is one of the biggest action-adventure video game series that does naturally include a lot of violence. Fortnite 2 is an incredibly popular online video game that involves a lot of violence and battling random people for no reason. So how can we distinguish between what is morally acceptable and what's not? I believe it can be thought out from 3 categories. The first one being intention. So the main idea behind this intention category is the media trying to educate educate or glorify. Adolescence is currently being shown around schools to highlight the importance of this discussion. This is very different to Zero Games gaslighting society into thinking that not liking this game makes you a bad person for kink shaming. In the case of GTA, it may be classed as inherently bad in this criteria. However, I still believe that it differs from No Mercy because of this next category, and that is the prominence within the storyline. Whilst there are some questionable actions that can occur inside GTA, they are not necessary to continue with the storyline. Even then, they are not explicitly depicting SA. In contrast, No Mercy includes a storyline that revolves around manipulative acts and male dominance. While some more extreme actions may be optional, this does not exclude from the fact that the main themes of the game surround misogyny and SA. Again, this is not a fantasy, and if it was meant to be a fantasy, that is not okay. The last category in my criteria is the portrayal of consequences. In GTA, you know when you've done something bad. You tend to have the police chase after you, and that still doesn't mean that you're not rewarded as being a criminal. However, there is a certain package that comes with that. You know you have done something wrong, you know you are being a criminal. This is not the case in No Mercy. I mentioned previously how users are rewarded for performing actions that are more manipulative and coercive. You are not painted as a villain, but rather a male who for some reason deserves dominance over all women. I just can't believe how I'm having to explain that that is just not okay. People can look at that and justify their actions in the real world based off of that game because there are no consequences that have been shown in the game. I believe that this category in particular is the most important because how the consequences of an action are portrayed can very much influence our attitude behind performing that action. Which leads to the question of whether it is inherently bad to portray male dominance in this way. I personally don't think so. In fact, we've recently seen how portraying such ideas can do more good than harm. Take the TV show Adolescence, for example, which has recently gone viral for its depiction of online misogyny and its impact on society, particularly on school children. Spoilers incoming if you haven't watched it already. In that series, it even involved a similar case where the girl that was murdered had revealing photos taken of herself, distributed non-consensually, resulting in harassment and misogynistic behaviours towards her. So what's the difference between these two media portrayals? Well, one educates whilst the other glorifies. While one showcases harm to fuel fantasies, the other educates why these practices are dangerous and harming our society. Image-based abuse is not a fictional fantasy that should be messed around with in a game. In fact, women are 27 times more likely than men to be harassed online, with 1 in 5 women experiencing online harassment or abuse. So what's happened with No Mercy now? Now that we've established the issues behind the game and that the developers have taken zero accountability, can you still buy it? Whilst the game was removed from platforms in Canada and Australia within 24 hours, it took a little while longer for it to be removed from the UK. No Mercy remained publicly available in the UK for the price of £9.99 with no age restrictions, no PEGI rating, and minimal oversight from Steam's parent company Valve. The UK Technology Secretary Peter Carl even berated Valve for allowing No Mercy to be sold, quoting, "We expect every one of those tech companies to remove content as soon as they possibly can after being made aware of it. That's what the law requires, it is what I require as a Secretary of State, and it is certainly how we expect platforms who operate and have the privilege of access to British society and British economy to do." Whilst it is great that this is being spoken about on a wide level, what is being done to solve it? Yes, it has now been removed off of Steam, but it continues to exist to all of the members who have paid for it. The Online Safety Act 2023 was created to address the dangers that content like No Mercy brings. It requires platforms to remove illegal material such as intimate image abuse, coercive behaviour, and extreme porn. Platforms must prevent minors from accessing harmful content and provide parents and children with clear and accessible ways to report problems online when they do arise. The criminal offences introduced by the Act came into effect on the 31st of January 2024. These offences cover encouraging or assisting serious self-harm, cyberflashing, sending false information intended to cause non-trivial harm, threatening communications, intimate image abuse, and epilepsy trolling. The Act requires all companies to take robust action against illegal content and activity. The kinds of illegal content and activity that platforms need to protect users from are set out in the Act, and this includes content relating to child SA, controlling or coercive behaviour, extreme sexual violence, extreme porn, fraud, racially or religiously aggravated public order offences, inciting violence, illegal immigration and people smuggling, promoting or facilitating suicide, intimate image abuse, selling illegal drugs or weapons, sexual exploitation, and terrorism. Ofcom, the UK's online safety regulator, can fine platforms up to £18 million or 10% of their global revenue and even block access to services entirely. Yet, as far as I'm aware, No Mercy remained publicly available in the UK quite some time after the ban in other countries and was only taken down after the waves of public backlash from the game, exposing the flaws in our system. The Game Ratings Authority, which administers the PEGI system in the UK, stated games on Steam can optionally apply for a PEGI age rating via our classification process. However, this is not mandated by the platform ahead of a game's release on the storefront. Whilst the game had warnings of violence, graphic images, and various themes, there was no age restriction or rating, which meant that anyone could buy it. As we've established, this game shouldn't have been created in the first place, nor should have gotten this far, especially with the fact that no one has faced consequences for this yet, despite the Online Safety Act outlining otherwise. This needs to change, right? As I see it, we need systemic change across 4 stakeholders: the developers, platforms, regulators, and even us as consumers. Let's start with the developers. The developers must be held accountable for games that glorify coercion, abuse, or incest. Freedom of expression doesn't include the freedom to promote illegal activity. You shouldn't be allowed to sell games that simulate sexual crimes. To willingly work on a project like this and not raise questions speaks volumes to the kind of person that you are. Especially as a developer and someone who loves game development, I'm honestly ashamed that this is even a thing. Creating games has such a wider and bigger purpose in this, and I genuinely believe that games can be used to do so much and create so much positivity in the world. So it's so sad to see them used for these terrible things. There is such a large potential for games to have a positive impact on the world. We are just focusing on the wrong areas of it. Let's talk about platforms. Valve needs to enforce mandatory age verification, PEGI ratings, and a proper review board for all explicit content. Optional content warnings are simply not enough when the subject matter is dangerous. Not only Valve, but all platforms should be checking the content that is being uploaded onto their platform. By automating the process poorly, loopholes are created that allows these terrible games to slip through and stay on the platform. And this is simply not acceptable. To put it straight, the system in place is just not working, and something needs to be done about that. This is not the first time that Steam has had to take down a game for similar reasons, and I'll speak more on that later. Moving on to regulators. Regulators like Ofcom must feel empowered to act on these complaints. If a game like No Mercy can stay on the UK storefront for some time and not be taken down without a public backlash and no age gate, the law just simply isn't protecting people fast enough. Especially with these laws being breached, appropriate consequences must follow, which I haven't seen yet. And The Last of Us is us. We should definitely speak up about this. But the way that we speak about this matters. The developers themselves claim that the outrage caused by this game only boosted their views. We need to combine outrage with action, using the legal tools available, not just amplifying the game. Even making this video, I didn't want to introduce the game to new audiences. I understand though that ultimately discussing this topic publicly comes with that consequence. However, I am bringing this up more to do with the fact that a game like this shouldn't have existed in the first place. And the rare case that it does, it should not have ever been uploaded to such platforms. What No Mercy promotes isn't a sexual fetish, it is a broader fantasy of male domination and control. It rewards players for reducing women to submissive objects and portrays domination as entitlement. These narratives enforce a culture where a woman's autonomy is undermined and abuse becomes normalized. This is not okay. The developers have also said, please consider, would anyone who wasn't looking for such content hear about this game if it weren't for hundreds of articles, petitions, and statements from content creators? After all, if someone believed that this game shouldn't be available in their country, they could have handled it quietly. They could have reported the matter to authorities. Meanwhile, websites use the trending topic for clicks, organizations placed links to fundraisers under petitions, and content creators made videos that garnered more views. The result of all this was that the game suddenly went from around 1,000 visits to 100 times more in those days. There are certainly events that need to be publicized quickly when someone is actually being harmed and we can save someone. Was it really necessary in this case for those few views and extra money for fundraisers? oh my god, the gaslighting is real. The gaslighting is real. Again, this very much feels like gaslighting people into not speaking up about this because that only benefits them because they're trying to silence people. It is clear why we need to speak up about this. It's not for views, it's not to bring more attraction to the game, it is simply to bring awareness that terrible things like this are happening, which shouldn't be allowed. People need to speak up about this, and I'm glad that the public has spoken up about this. I can definitely empathize with the fact that media can sometimes twist things and misinformation is spread because so many people are spreading different stories. And that has happened in this case. People are calling this a simulator and are saying content that is not in the game. And from that, I can see why the developers are getting a little bit annoyed. I don't think it's a simulator. What I do think the developers are doing though is that they are brushing over all of those main themes of blackmail, abuse, SA manipulation. They don't even think it's a problem. They just think the main SA is the problem, and even that is barely noticeable in the game, which I disagree with. Even the blackmailing, the manipulation, the domination, that is a problem, and I feel like it's quite sad because it seems to me that it has already been normalized so much. It is still abuse. It is still not okay to glorify those crimes, or at the very least normalize them into thinking it's not bad. It is still a crime. The main argument I've seen for keeping this game around is that there are many other games out there that have the exact same or very similar theme as No Mercy. But those games are allowed to exist, so it raises the question as to why did this game blow up? With so many games out there with the same themes of SA, why did this game be the one to gain attraction? Well, the answer doesn't actually really matter in my opinion. And in that sense, I can empathize with Xerac Games as to why they feel unjust in that they have been shut down whilst many other games like them continue to exist. But the truth is, they should all be shut down. None of them should be allowed to exist. So it is a shame that whilst No Mercy from Xerac Games has been shut down, there does continue to exist many other games that exemplify the same terrible, awful themes that we've talked about today. They fly under the radar and they do not get caught, and that is because of the terrible review systems that these platforms have. They are not reviewing their games enough, they are not reviewing the games enough before they enter the platform, and that needs to be worked on immediately. There are so many cases of this happening. I don't know what it's going to take for these platforms to start recognizing that they need to do better. All of those alternate games are just as bad as No Mercy and deserve to face the same consequences. I understand that there is a fine line between fantasy and real world violence, so it does raise a question as to where should the line be drawn. That's a complex question which I don't even think the gaming community has fully established yet. It's one of those discussions where everyone is going to have a different opinion, and whilst it is a tough one, I hope that the discussion we had earlier about my criteria of intention, prominence within the storyline, and the portrayal of consequences gives you a rough idea of where I stand. It is definitely something we need to be more careful about, especially considering the growing influence of misogynistic online figures echoing the same messages of male entitlement. The developers have also stressed in responses to many news articles that a lot of the SA portions of the game are optional and that the description of the game was highly exaggerated for marketing. Firstly, that's false marketing. Also, I'm utterly shocked that the developers are surprised that if they advertise that a game does awful things, that people are going to assume that that game does those awful things. Like, what? If I say I can fly, and then people think I'm gonna fly, and then I don't fly, how am I supposed to get angry at people for thinking that I was going to fly? That's what I don't understand here. You can't have claims in your description saying that you're doing all of these things that portray complete male dominance, making women yours, and then get upset when the public run with that and say that this game is doing all those things and saying, oh, the public and the media are portraying me negatively. This is not what the game is about. This is not what the game does. Well, then you should have never portrayed it that way in the first place. Even so, your game still does that? I'm not gonna lie. I've spoken a lot about what I think the game does and doesn't do. I don't think it's an SA simulator, although I do think it is still harmful on a number of different levels. So I'm not saying that Xerac Games is excused for saying the media is twisting things. They're definitely not excused from this. However, I can see how things have been taken and ran with it, but then don't market the game in that way. That is such a stupid thing to do. This is also worrying because they've talked a lot about how because the SA is optional, that makes everything else okay. It's not. As we've discussed at the beginning, the unavoidable storyline still involves blackmail, male dominance, and image-based abuse. These are all themes that are still very much recurrent in today's society and should not be glorified. It's worrying that the developers have almost normalized this already, so they don't think it's that bad. They were not apologizing, they were gaslighting society into thinking it's our fault for disliking the game, when really, the game is just a bad game. It's a terrible game. So No Mercy isn't just a game. It's a mirror held up to some of the darkest corners of online culture, and instead of condemning that, it rewards it. If this is what we are normalizing through entertainment, what does that say about us? And more importantly, who gets hurt in the process? No Mercy should have never existed in the first place, but its existence is a reminder of what happens when our digital spaces are not regulated. This is about accountability and whether we allow certain forms of media to trivialize abuse in the name of fantasy or demand better from the stories that we tell. Amongst this, there are a lot of terrible things that are also happening in the world at the moment, and this just feels like another thing that has been added. This, alongside all the other stuff in the news recently, just feels like we are reverting and going backwards. We need more than laws. We need responsibility from everyone. Thank you so much for watching.